The muzzle flash cut through the heavy rain for exactly half a second before the bullet streaked toward the old woman's heart. Ariel Monroe Kane didn't think. Thinking would have meant staying paralyzed behind the heavy service tray she'd been carrying. Thinking would have meant watching the elegant woman who'd just treated her with unexpected kindness die on a rain-slicked sidewalk. So, Ariel didn't think. She lunged. Her damp cotton uniform collided with expensive beige wool and the faint scent of jasmine perfume as she threw her weight against Madame Coyn. The lead that was meant to end a legacy instead tore through the air, grazing Ariel's side in a streak of white-hot fire that made the world tilt. She heard a sound like a whip snapping against her ear, the crack of a gun. Maybe it was her own gasp, or maybe it was the screech of tires as black SUVs swerved onto the curb, cutting through the darkness. Ariel hit the wet pavement hard, the taste of copper and rain filling her mouth. Blood bloomed across her white waitress blouse, spreading like ink in a pool of water. Above her, the silver-haired woman she'd just shielded stared down, her pearl necklace swaying as she trembled. Shock was etched into her dignified features, a mask of power finally broken by a stranger's sacrifice. The cold was everything. It wrapped around Ariel, dragging her into a hazy place where the neon Open 24 sign blurred into a smear of flickering red light, and the world faded into the rhythmic sound of falling rain. Before we go into the details of this amazing story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your city. The steady, rhythmic pulse of a heart monitor replaced the sound of the falling rain. When Ariel opened her eyes, the flickering red neon of the Open 24 sign was gone, replaced by a ceiling of soft, recessed LED panels that glowed with a clinical, expensive warmth. She tried to shift her weight, but a sharp tug in her side, a searing reminder of the lead that had tried to claim her life, forced a jagged breath from her lungs. This wasn't the city hospital with its peeling gray paint and overcrowded hallways. This was somewhere monolithic. Somewhere hidden. The room was a symphony of high-tech shadows and polished glass. Monitors displayed her vitals in glowing sapphire lines, and the silence was so absolute it felt heavy, filtered through a ventilation system that smelled of ozone and expensive antiseptic. She was no longer wearing her damp, blood-stained waitress uniform. Instead, she was wrapped in charcoal gray silk sheets that felt like a mockery of her usual life. She was a woman who measured time in coffee refills and nickel-and-dime tips, and yet she had woken up in the heart of a fortress. A shadow moved near the floor-to-ceiling window. Kong Jin-suk stood with his back to her, watching the Seoul skyline through the glass. Even in the dim light, he radiated a predatory grace that made the air in the room feel thin. He wore a black suit that looked as if it had been forged rather than tailored, his silhouette sharp and unyielding against the distant city lights. When he turned, his gaze didn't just land on her, it dissected her. His eyes were dark, calculating, and for the first time in her life, Ariel felt truly seen, not as a background character in a busy restaurant, but as the single variable that had changed the trajectory of a war. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that carried the weight of a quiet command. He didn't move toward her, yet his presence seemed to fill every inch of the sterile space. "The doctor said you were lucky." "I don't believe in luck. I believe in choices." Ariel swallowed, her throat feeling as though it were lined with sandpaper. "Your mother." She managed to whisper, the memory of the elderly woman's silver hair and panicked eyes flashing through her mind. Jin-suk finally stepped into the light. A ghost of a smile, one that didn't reach his cold eyes, touched his lips. "My mother is safe because a girl who should have stayed behind her service tray decided to play martyr. She is currently lighting incense for your recovery." He paused, his shadow stretching across her bed like a shroud. "But the men who fired that shot now know your face. In their world, you are no longer a witness. You are a target. And in my world, we do not leave our debts unpaid." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from the edge of her silk blanket. "From this moment on, Ariel Monroe Kane, your old life is dead. You are under the protection of the Kong Syndicate. And I am the only thing standing between you and the people who want to finish what they started." The weight of his words settled over her, heavier than the silk, more permanent than the scar forming on her side. The dragon had brought her into his lair, and as she looked into Junsuk's eyes, Ariel realized that being saved might be just as dangerous as being hunted. The door to the medical suite hissed open with a soft, mechanical sigh, but it wasn't the heavy, rhythmic tread of Junsuk that followed. Instead, the air in the room shifted, filled with the delicate, powdery scent of pressed flowers and ancient tradition. Madame Seo Yan entered the room, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her silk hanbok rustling like dry leaves against the polished floor. She moved with a quiet, terrifying grace, the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Ariel tried to push herself up against the pillows, her breath hitching as the stitches in her side protested. Before she could strain herself, the older woman was there, her hand, surprisingly cool and steady, pressing gently against Ariel's shoulder. "Be still, child," Madame Seo said. Her voice was a soft rasp, melodic yet as unyielding as iron. She sat in the chair Junsuk had occupied, her dark eyes searching Ariel's face with an intensity that made the waitress feel as though her very soul was being weighed. "I have spent 70 years being protected by men with guns and titles. I have never been protected by a girl with a plastic serving tray. I didn't think," Ariel whispered, her voice cracking. "I saw you, and I saw the gun, and my legs just moved. I'm glad you're okay, ma'am. I'm ready to head home as soon as the doctors say it's fine. I have a double shift starting tomorrow." A shadow of a smile, sad and final, touched Madame Seo's lips. She reached out, taking Ariel's hand in hers. "There are no more shifts, Ariel. There is no more diner. In my culture, what you did is not a simple act of kindness. It is Hyol Chai, a debt of blood. You placed your life in the path of a bullet meant for the matriarch of the Kong family. You did not just save a woman, you saved the foundation of everything my son has built." The weight of the woman's words felt heavier than the mountain of medical equipment surrounding them. Ariel shook her head, a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. "I don't want a debt. I just want my life back." "Your life ended the moment that muzzle flash lit the rain," Madame Seo said firmly, her grip on Ariel's hand tightening. "The men who tried to kill me are the Shadow Seven. They are meticulous. They are cruel. They saw a waitress defy them, and they cannot let that insult stand. If you walk out of these doors, you will be dead before you reach the end of the block. And because of the blood debt I owe you, I cannot allow that. My honor, and my son's, demands that your safety be absolute." She leaned in closer, the pearls at her neck catching the clinical light. "You saved the Queen Mother, Ariel. That means you are no longer a stranger. You are a daughter of this house. And a daughter of the Kong syndicate does not pour coffee for strangers. She commands them." Ariel looked at the high-tech walls of the room, realizing they weren't just there to keep her alive. They were there to keep her in. The diner, the rain, the simple anonymity of her old life, it was all drifting away, replaced by a debt she hadn't asked for and a family that would never let her go. The heavy silence that followed Madame Seo's departure was broken minutes later by the deliberate, rhythmic click of leather soles against the marble. Kong Junsuk returned, but the predatory edge he had carried before was now sharpened by a cold, professional focus. He didn't sit, he stood at the foot of her bed, his shadow lengthening across the charcoal silk like a territorial claim. In his hand, he held a sleek tablet, its screen glowing with the faces of men Ariel didn't recognize, men with cold eyes and jagged scars. "My mother has a soft heart for debts of honor," Junsuk began, his voice cutting through the hum of the medical monitors. "But I have a cold head for logistics. The Shadow Seven don't care about your heroism, Ariel. To them, you are a loose thread. A witness who saw the face of their top lieutenant. By tomorrow morning, every bounty hunter in the city will have your photo on their phone." Ariel felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. "So what? You'll keep me locked in this room forever? I have a family. My brother's tuition is due in 2 weeks. I can't just disappear." "You aren't going to disappear," Junsuk said, stepping closer until he was looming over her. "You are going to become the most visible woman in Seoul. The Shadow 7 are bold, but they are not suicidal. They will attack a waitress. They will not attack the future wife of the Kong syndicate's head. The heir seemed to leave the room. Ariel stared at him, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Future wife? You're joking. I never joke about my security, he replied, his face a mask of granite. We call it the SHIELD protocol. It is a strategic engagement. By claiming you as mine, I place the entire weight of my organization's military and political power around you. An attack on you would no longer be a cleanup job, it would be an act of total war that would bring the government, the police, and every rival clan down on their heads. They won't risk it. You want me to lie to the world? To pretend I'm yours? Ariel's voice trembled. I don't even know your middle name. My middle name is irrelevant. What matters is that as my fiancé, you are untouchable. You will have a security detail, a new identity, and the funds to ensure your family in America lives like royalty for the rest of their lives. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, the scent of expensive tobacco and cold rain clinging to his suit. This is not a proposal, Ariel. It is a survival strategy. You saved my mother's life, and now I am going to save yours. But once we announce this, there is no turning back. You leave the waitress behind. You become a Kong. Ariel looked into his dark, unyielding eyes and realized the bullet hadn't just grazed her side, it had shattered her world. She was being offered a throne that felt more like a cage, but as the memory of the gunman's muzzle flash burned in her mind, she knew she had only one choice. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the cold silk of his sleeve. Then tell me what I need to do. The reality of Junsook's SHIELD protocol hung in the air like the humidity before a storm. Ariel looked at her hands, calloused from carrying heavy trays and scrubbed raw from diner bleach, and then at the man who moved through the world like he owned the shadows within it. If she was going to step into his light, she wasn't going to do it as a victim. She was going to do it as a sister. If I do this, Ariel began, her voice gaining a steady edge that made Junsook pause, his hand resting on the sleek surface of the medical tablet. If I play this part and put a target on my back for your family's sake, I don't want jewelry. I don't want a closet full of clothes I'll never feel at home in. Junsook arched a dark brow, his interest piqued by the shift in her energy. Then tell me your price, Ariel. Everyone has one. My brother, Marcus, she said, he's 18, brilliant, and stuck in a neighborhood that doesn't care about his potential. I want a trust fund. I want his tuition to any university in the world paid in full, up front. I want him moved out of our apartment and into somewhere where he doesn't have to keep his head down when he walks to the bus stop. She took a breath, the stitch in her side stinging, but she pushed through the pain. And most importantly, anonymity. My family can never know where this money came from. They can never know about you, your mother, or the Kong syndicate. If the Shadow 7 find out I have people back home, they become leveraged. I want them erased from any record that connects them to me. To the world, Ariel Monroe Kane needs to be a woman who walked out of that diner and vanished into your world alone. Junsook studied her, his gaze lingering on the fierce protectiveness written in the lines of her face. He had expected her to ask for a way out or a mountain of cash for herself. Instead, she was bargaining for the safety of people half a world away. You're asking me to rewrite the digital and physical footprints of 3 people across 2 continents, Junsook said, his voice dropping to a low hum. It's a massive undertaking. It requires resources most governments don't possess. You're a mafia boss, Ariel countered, her eyes locking onto his. Don't tell me you can't make a few people invisible. A slow, genuine flash of something, perhaps respect, crossed Junsook's features. He tapped a command into the tablet, the blue light reflecting in his dark eyes. It's done. Marcus will receive a private scholarship notification by Monday. Your mother will be contacted by a relocation firm regarding a winning she doesn't remember entering. They will be safe, Ariel. And they will never know you were the one who bought their freedom. Thank you, she whispered, the weight of the world finally lifting, only to be replaced by the weight of the gold band Junsuk pulled from his vest pocket. "Don't thank me yet," he warned, stepping to her bedside and holding the ring between two fingers. "You've secured their life. Now, you begin yours as a ghost in a silk dress. Are you ready to meet the press?" The transition from the sterile medical wing to the inner sanctum of the Kong estate was a blur of minimalist architecture and suffocating luxury. Ariel soon realized that her protection came with a grueling curriculum. She was no longer a waitress, she was a project, a diamond being cut to fit a very specific, very lethal setting. The days began before dawn with Madame Seo. The elderly woman was a relentless tutor in the art of Korean etiquette and the labyrinthine politics of the syndicate. Ariel learned that a bow wasn't just a gesture, it was a calibrated measurement of power. She memorized the names of the 7 families, the internal rivalries, and the delicate hierarchy of the Kong household. She learned to drink tea with a steady hand while Madame Seo explained which uncles were loyal and which were merely waiting for Junsuk to bleed. To survive here, Ariel had to stop reacting and start anticipating. She had to trade her American directness for the strategic silence of a chess player. The afternoons, however, were much less refined. In a soundproofed gym beneath the estate, the scent of expensive perfume was replaced by the acrid tang of sweat and floor mats. Junsuk didn't outsource her physical training, he oversaw it himself. He stripped off his suit jacket, rolling his sleeves over forearms that were maps of scars and tension. He didn't teach her how to fight fair, he taught her how to survive. "The Shadow 7 will expect you to be soft," Junsuk said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls as he circled her. "They see a waitress. They see a victim. Use that." He showed her how to use her center of gravity, how to turn a wrist lock into a bone-snapping pivot, and where to strike a man twice her size to make him drop. Every time she hit the mat, his hand was there to pull her back up, his touch a brief, electric spark against her skin. There was no pity in his eyes, only a cold, driving necessity. He was forging her into a weapon because he knew that a shield that couldn't strike back was eventually broken. By the end of the second week, the soft halo of her curls was pulled back into a tight, severe knot. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors looked back at her with eyes that had lost their wide-eyed diner innocence. The bruise on her side had faded to a dull yellow, but the steel in her spine was new. As she stood in the center of the gym, breathing hard, she realized she wasn't just learning to play a role. She was becoming the very thing the city feared. She was becoming a Kong, and the diamond was finally beginning to show its edge. The moon hung low over the Han River, visible through the reinforced glass of the estate's balcony. Ariel stood there alone, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the silk robe that had replaced her cotton apron. The silence of the mansion was never true silence, it was a humming, heavy thing, filled with the invisible presence of men in suits standing guard at every perimeter. The glass door slid open with a whisper. Junsuk stepped out, the sharp wind ruffling his hair, the first time Ariel had seen him look even slightly unkempt. He didn't speak, he simply leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights that glittered like fallen jewels. "Do you ever miss it?" Ariel asked softly, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "The quiet? The feeling of just being a person instead of a target?" Junsuk didn't look at her, but his jaw tightened. "I was born into this, Ariel. For me, quiet is a warning that something is about to break. My life isn't measured in peace. It's measured in the safety of the 4,000 families that rely on the Kong name for their bread and their protection." Ariel looked down at her hands. "I used to think my life was hard because I was always tired. Always counting pennies for Marcus's books. But at least I knew who I was fighting for. It was simple." "It's still simple," Junsuk said, finally turning to face her. The cold analytical mask he wore in the training room had softened, replaced by a weary sincerity. "You took a bullet for my mother because you couldn't stand to see a life extinguished. You bargained away your own identity to ensure your brother's future. You and I are not so different, Ariel. We are both shields." He stepped closer, the scent of the night air and his familiar, expensive cologne wrapping around her. The only difference is the size of the shadow we cast. You protect your family with your heart, I protect mine with my life. Both burdens are heavy. Both are lonely. For a moment, the distance between the American waitress and the Korean Mafia boss vanished. In the dim light, they weren't a strategic alliance or a blood debt, they were two people weary of the weight they carried. Ariel reached out, her hand hesitant, before resting it on the sleeve of his coat. Who protects you, Jun-suk? She asked. His eyes searched hers, dark and fathomless. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he placed his hand over hers, his grip firm and grounded. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but something deeper, a recognition of shared sacrifice. In that quiet moment, amidst the luxury of a gilded cage, Ariel realized she wasn't just his fiancée for the cameras. She was the only person in his world who understood the cost of standing in the gap. The bond was no longer just about survival, it was about the shared weight of a world that demanded everything from them. The boardroom of the Kong estate felt less like an office and more like a courtroom. It was a space of heavy mahogany, the scent of old paper, and a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Seated around the massive table were the elders, 6 men whose faces were maps of old wars and even older prejudices. They did not look at Ariel as she entered, they looked through her, as if she were a ghost haunting their hallowed halls. Jun-suk stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but Ariel could feel the tension radiating from him. He was throwing her to the wolves to see if she could lead the pack. The girl from the diner, one elder, a man named Elder Choi, spat the words like they were bitter. He didn't bother to look up from his tea. You expect us to bow to a foreigner who smells of cheap coffee and grease? You risk the stability of our bloodline for a momentary impulse of gratitude? Ariel felt the familiar prickle of heat in her chest, the same fire that had kept her going through 12-hour shifts on frozen feet. She didn't wait for Jun-suk to defend her. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor, and placed her hands flat on the table. I don't smell like grease anymore, Elder Choi, Ariel said, her voice steady and low. And if you're worried about stability, perhaps you should look at your own ledger. The room went ice cold. Jun-suk's eyes narrowed, but he didn't stop her. I spent the last week studying the syndicate's logistics, Ariel continued, drawing from the sleepless nights she'd spent hunched over the tablets Madame Co had provided. You're losing 4% of your port revenue in Incheon because of a bottleneck created by the Shadow Seven's new shell companies. You think I'm a liability because I'm an outsider? That's exactly why I'm your greatest asset. I see the patterns you've grown too comfortable to notice. She leaned in, her gaze locking onto Choi's. You want a bloodline that's safe? Then stop looking at my skin and start looking at my hands. They're the hands that caught the knife meant for your matriarch. If I hadn't moved, you wouldn't be sitting here debating my worth, you'd be wearing black at a funeral and watching the syndicate crumble under a power vacuum. The silence that followed was different now. The condescension had vanished, replaced by a grudging, heavy curiosity. Elder Choi finally looked up, his obsidian eyes meeting hers. For a long moment, the air hung in the balance. Then, slowly, he gave a single, stiff nod. She has the tongue of a diplomat and the heart of a brawler, Choi remarked to Jun-suk, his voice devoid of its earlier venom. Perhaps she is not a liability after all. Perhaps she is exactly the shield we didn't know we needed. Ariel exhaled, her spine straighter than it had ever been at the diner. She had faced the council and survived. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was a player in their game. The traditional incense smoke swirled through the private shrine of the Kong estate, thick and sweet, as the family gathered for the anniversary of the late patriarch's passing. Ariel stood at Jun-suk's side, her posture perfect, her black lace dress a stark contrast to the ivory of her skin. The elders were there, their eyes no longer hostile but watchful. For a few moments, the world felt still, until the glass of the high clerestory windows disintegrated. The sound wasn't a crack, it was an explosion. Before the first shard of glass could hit the marble, the heavy rhythmic thud of suppressed gunfire tore through the prayerful silence. Get down! Jun-suk's voice roared, his hand reaching for the holster beneath his tuxedo jacket. The Shadow Seven hadn't come for a conversation. They had come to decapitate the Kong syndicate in its most sacred space. Smoke grenades hissed across the floor, billowing gray veils that turned the room into a chaotic labyrinth. Through the haze, Ariel saw the glint of a tactical vest, a mercenary lunging toward Madame Co. The old Ariel would have screamed. The old Ariel would have frozen. But the woman Junsuk had forged in the basement gym didn't hesitate. As the mercenary reached for the elderly woman, Ariel didn't just step in the way, she moved with a calculated, lethal grace. She grabbed a heavy bronze incense burner from the altar, swinging it in a low, brutal arc that connected with the attacker's knee with a sickening crunch. As he buckled, she used his momentum against him, driving her elbow into the base of his skull exactly where Junsuk had shown her. He hit the floor, unconscious before he could even cry out. She didn't stop to breathe. She lunged for the mercenary's fallen sidearm, her fingers closing around the cold grip. She didn't fire blindly. She scanned the room through the smoke, her heart a steady drum of adrenaline. To her left, two more attackers were flanking Junsuk, who was pinned behind a fallen mahogany table. Ariel stepped into the clear, her stance wide and grounded. She squeezed the trigger twice. The shots were precise, striking the attackers' shoulders and forcing them back into the shadows. It wasn't about killing, it was about control. Junsuk. Left flank, she shouted, her voice cutting through the ringing in the room. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers through the chaos. For a split second, the Mafia boss saw not a waitress or a fiancé, but a partner. Guided by her warning, he pivoted and neutralized the remaining threats with a flurry of gunfire. As the security teams flooded the room to secure the perimeter, the silence returned, heavier than before. Ariel stood in the center of the wreckage, the gun still steady in her hand, her dress torn at the hem. She looked at Madame Co., who was unharmed, and then at the elders, who were staring at her in stunned silence. She wasn't just a shield anymore. She had held the line. She had fought for the House of Kong, and in the settling dust, everyone knew that the girl from the diner was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly how to survive a war. The acrid scent of gunpowder lingered in the shrine, mixing with the dying embers of the incense. While the syndicate's cleanup crews worked with ghost-like efficiency to erase the physical evidence of the breach, the air between Ariel and Junsuk remained heavy with something that couldn't be scrubbed away. Ariel stood by the tall, jagged remains of the window, the cool night air stinging the small cuts on her face. She still held the weight of the gun in her hand, but it felt different now, less like a foreign object and more like a part of her. Junsuk approached her, his movements stripped of their usual calculated dominance. He looked tired, a smudge of soot on his high cheekbone, his tie discarded somewhere in the wreckage. He reached out, his fingers brushing the lace of her torn sleeve before his hand settled gently on her shoulder. "The Shadow Seven are broken," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet. "The elders have already called for a full-scale retaliation. Within 48 hours, the threat to you, and to your family in America, will be permanently extinguished. The debt is settled, Ariel." Ariel looked at him, her heart giving a strange, hollow thud. "Then the shield protocol is over. I can go back. I can start over somewhere where nobody knows my name." Junsuk's grip tightened just a fraction, not to restrain her, but as if he were grounding himself. He turned her to face him, his dark eyes searching hers with a vulnerability that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. "You can," he admitted, the words sounding like a confession. "The papers are ready. Your new identity is clean. You've more than paid for the life I gave your brother." He paused, the distant sirens of a city that had no idea how close it had come to a total gang war wailing in the background. "But I am asking you to stay. Not as a waitress, and not as a shield for my mother." He stepped closer, the space between them disappearing. "I have spent my life surrounded by people who bow because they fear me or because they want something from me. You are the only person who has ever stood beside me simply because it was the right thing to do. You are the only person I trust with the truth of who I am." "Junsuk," she whispered, her breath hitching. "Stay," he said, his voice raw. "Not because of a blood debt. Not because of a strategy. Stay because I don't want to face the next war without the only person who actually sees me. Ariel looked past him at the luxury of the estate, then back at the man who was arguably the most dangerous in soul, and the most isolated. She thought of the diner, the rain, and the invisible girl she used to be. That girl was gone, buried under silk and steel. She reached up, her hand cupping his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. She wasn't a victim of circumstance anymore, she was a woman making a choice. I'm not a waitress anymore, she said softly, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. No, Jin-suk replied, his hand covering hers. You're a queen. And it's time we showed them what that means. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the Han River in shades of gold and violet, Ariel didn't turn toward the exit. She turned toward him, stepping out of the shadows and into a future she finally owned. Core moral lessons. Instinctive courage. Ariel didn't save Madame Seo because she wanted a reward, she did it because thinking would have meant staying paralyzed. True heroism is often an instinctive refusal to let others suffer. The value of agency, even when trapped in the syndicate, Ariel negotiated. She didn't ask for jewelry, she asked for her brother's future. Moral strength lies in using your leverage to protect those who can't protect themselves. Adaptability as survival. Ariel transitioned from carrying service trays to handling firearms. The story suggests that our old lives don't define our limits, our willingness to learn and adapt does. The burden of leadership. Jin-suk and Ariel find common ground in the weight of the shield. The lesson is that power isn't about luxury, it's about the lonely responsibility of keeping others safe. Thanks for watching, dearest. If you enjoyed our work, do well to show us some love by subscribing to the channel so you will be the first to be notified anytime we drop another story.